I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know I'm doing it really, really well.
Hello and welcome back to our Kerbal Space Program career mode series. This is episode 4 and things might look a little bit different from last episode. We have finally added mods. They aren't exactly game changing mods, they just make the visuals look incredible. I feel like this is the true starting point of our series. We've tackled the beginner missions like achieving orbit around Kerbin and landing on the moon multiple times to gather science, but today we set our sights on Minmus, Kerbin's second moon. Tiny and mysterious, Minmus is the smaller of Kerbin's 2 natural satellites with a diameter of just 60 kilometers. Unlike other celestial bodies in the Kerbal system, Minmus has a striking pale turquoise colour. Minmus orbits Kerbin at an inclination of 6 degrees relative to Kerbin's equator. This inclination means that planning transfers requires a bit more precision than travelling to the moon, providing a good learning experience for orbital mechanics. It also has extremely low gravity, about 5.6% of Kerbin's gravity. This makes it a perfect place for practicing landings and takeoffs, as well as performing spectacular jumps. Because of its low gravity and smooth terrain, Minmus is one of the easiest celestial bodies to land on and take off from, making it ideal for beginner players. And as an added bonus, Minmus is rich in science opportunities. Each biome offers unique science data, making it an excellent place to maximise scientific returns. We began our journey in the vehicle assembly building, where constructing this rocket took a bit longer than usual. The reason? The mods we're using have completely revamped the textures and skins of various parts, so I needed some time to get familiar with those changes. As always, we started with the lander, adding power and an antenna. Since we're heading to Minmus, I decided to cram as many science experiments on it as physically possible. I made sure to use a 2-seater command pod so Bob, the scientist, could come along for the mission. He can reset the experiments so they aren't just a one-time use, and in theory we should bring back a boatload of science points. Or should I say, a rocket load. Get it? Because... never mind. Anyway, we sealed the lander into a fairing pod and added the additional parts of the rocket that will actually get us into orbit. This consisted of an upper stage and a lower stage with 4 extra solid rocket boosters that were probably overkill, but go big or go home, I guess. Once we completed the build, Jeb took the controls of the rocket and swiftly launched the vessel up into space. This gave me a chance to try out the new mod I installed called Camera Tools. This mod allowed me to create amazing cinematic visuals like the ones you saw in the start of the video. If you're a returning viewer, the end of the last episode was all done with this mod. Nothing drastic happened during this launch, to be honest. Everything went kinda smoothly and according to plan. We obtained orbit relatively quickly, and then it was time to make our next manoeuvre. So at this point you're probably thinking, this doesn't look like Minmus, and you are correct. What? You thought I'd show you my Minmus landing so soon in the video? We're only 3.5 minutes in.
Gotcha, bitch!
Alright, let's get back on track. So here's the thing, I forgot to mention I decided to take an impromptu landing on the moon for the 5th time? Honestly, I've lost count. But there is a good reason for this detour. Our mission scientist Bob needs to gather as much scientific data as possible. The more data we collect, the more parts we can unlock, and those parts are crucial for future missions across the solar system. Trust me, the upcoming challenges will be worth it. So once we are done here, we'll set our sights on Minmus for the next leg of our journey. So as we activated various science experiments above the moon's surface, I had Bob go out and cling on for dear life as he reset the experiments. This allowed us to reactivate them in different parts of the moon. Eventually, we made yet another landing, obtaining even more science for our space center by touching down in a new biome. I did actually forget to plant a flag, but I can live with that considering the amount of science we actually collected on this mission. I'll reveal the full amount once we're back on Kerbin. As Bob resets the science experiments before we head back to Kerbin, take a moment to enjoy the stunning views enabled by these incredible mods. Appreciate just how amazing this game looks now, and let's take a second to recognise the hard work and dedication of the modders who made this all possible. Their efforts have truly transformed this experience. As we re-entered Kerbin's atmosphere, I had this weird feeling that something big was about to be revealed. Nothing could have prepared me for the actual amount of science data we accumulated from that expedition. When I recovered the vessel, I was greeted by the triumphant return of Jeb and Bob, along with a massive haul of 980 science points. This was by far our biggest accomplishment to date. And now came the exciting part, deciding what to unlock in the tech tree with all this science data. After careful consideration, I decided to unlock precision engineering. This gave us access to better antennas, a probe core for unmanned flights, and equipment for performing EVA science on surfaces of moons and planets. Next, I unlocked electronics, which opened up even more EVA science experiments and additional scientific instruments to attach to our rockets, along with yet another antenna. Another unlock was scanning tech. This provided us with a range of science experiments, including the infrared telescope, the surface scanning module, the survey scanner, the atmospheric fluid spectrovariometer, and the medium scanning arm. Lastly, I unlocked heavier rocketry, giving us access to more powerful thrusters. With these new technologies, our future missions will be more advanced and capable than ever before. The journey to Minmus and beyond is looking more promising with each unlock we get from this tech tree. And now finally, this is the official Minmus launch. This segment is full of all the mistakes, and believe me, one blunder here is truly devastating, and it had nothing to do with the game, but we'll get into that near the end of the video. With this build, I used the exact same rocket as the first launch. The only differences were the addition of the newly unlocked science experiments and some extra fuel as a precaution. Other than that, I didn't change anything in any other stages. As we launched this rocket, I was completely oblivious to my first mistake. And if you haven't noticed already, there's an imposter in the cockpit. Yes. Instead of Bob the scientist, somehow Bill the engineer has managed to take Bob's place. This means we won't be able to reset any science experiments, so we only have one shot at gathering scientific data. The damage is done and there's no turning back now. Bob will just have to stay on Kermin and eat all the snacks that Jebediah couldn't fit into the command module. And it was around this point of the mission that I realised the mistake of Bill's presence. After completing a few science experiments high above Minmus and discovering I couldn't restore them, it became painfully clear that there was really no turning back. Until we landed on Minmus, I was limited to only performing science experiments that didn't require a scientist for restoration. I decided to wait until we touched down on Minmus to conduct all the single-use experiments, aiming to maximise the amount of data we could gather. As I aimed to land near the ice lake, I took in the breathtaking sights that Minmus had to offer. Its turquoise glow against the contrasting darkness of space on the horizon was truly mesmerising. As I approached my landing site, I was slightly off target, but I managed to use the angle of the hill I landed on to propel myself in the right direction and touch down on the flat ice lakes. We gathered as much science as possible, planted a flag, and celebrated our successful landing on Minmus. Now you're probably wondering what the other blunder is. Well, this mission turned out to be a success. We returned to Kerbin and successfully gained 558 science points, which we used to unlock the command modules section of the tech tree. This grants us access to more variations of the command pods. We also unlock specialised construction, providing us with bigger fairings, docking ports, and a larger flag. Lastly, we unlocked specialised control, which offers better reaction wheels for our ships, larger monopropellant tanks, both of which are quite useful. This mission went so well in fact that I wanted to take Bob to Minmus as he missed out, so I decided to launch another mission to Minmus. And this is where things took a turn for the worst. Not with the mission itself, it was actually very successful, but unfortunately my OBS decided to merge newer recordings with older ones, resulting in half of the footage being lost. So for this part I'll have to try my best to explain what actually happened on the mission. I did manage to salvage some of the footage, but there are definitely crucial parts to this mission that were lost. Luckily, the footage of the build for this mission was actually usable. It consisted of a 3-seat command pod for Jeb, Bill and Bob. I crammed as many science experiments onto it as possible and added containers to the lander that housed EVA science equipment to deploy once we reached the surface of Minmus. I also added a docking port to the top of the lander, which would prove very useful later in the mission. Once the lander was completed, I added a stage for circularization and then covered it up in a fairing pod. After that, I added the stages to get us up into space, and then it was time to launch. The launch was a success, but I encountered a small problem along the way. My brain went into autopilot and I headed straight for the moon. This was a mistake, but luckily the moons aligned for me on this launch and I was able to slingshot around the moon and get an encounter with Minmus. It became apparent early on that I definitely wasn't going to have enough fuel to complete this mission. Fortunately, I noticed it early on, which gave me enough time to think of a plan. So I got the ship into a stable orbit around Minmus and went back to the vehicle assembly building to create an unmanned spacecraft to bring Jeb, Bill and Bob the fuel they desperately needed. And unfortunately, this is where the footage ends. And it's heartbreaking because this was honestly the best thing I have ever done in Kerbal Space Program so far. The only way I can really show you what happened is with my limited animation skills. I apologise in advance, but let's continue with the story. So once I finished building the unmanned spaceship, I headed straight for Minmus, and this time I didn't accidentally go to the moon first. Once we reached Minmus, we managed to rendezvous with Jebediah relatively quickly, and the docking went as smoothly as it could have. The unmanned ship refueled the team's spacecraft, and after disengaging from the refueler, they descended down to Minmus to explore. Once we landed, it was time to deploy the EVA science and plant our new beautiful custom flag. Yes, I made a custom flag and added it to the game.
Nice.
I was going to do this big reveal, but OBS decided to absolutely screw me over. But anyway, this is no longer Kerbal Space Program. This is the Bluntz Space Corporation. Once we finished deploying the science, we made our way back to Kerbin, feeling accomplished with the mission we had completed. For our efforts at Minmus, we brought back 727 science points, and we unlocked advanced exploration, advanced electronics, precision propulsion, and advanced landing. And that pretty much concludes our Minmus mission for today. Again, I apologise for the OBS incident. It generally was just out of my control. I could have gone back and re-recorded the mission, but I want this series to be as authentic as possible, so I really hope you don't mind the way I edited this section. But yeah, until next time, thank you and goodbye.